Hello, welcome to Fashion Open Studio. My name is Alec Leach. I'm your host today. I am an editor and consultant and the founder of Future Dust, which is an Instagram platform that's all about raising awareness for responsible fashion. And here today, we have gathered some thought leaders in fashion and culture who, as part of the Fashion Open Studio project, we're going to be looking at a quote today by Albert Camus, which a famous French existentialist philosopher, which is "I rebel, therefore I am." And with that question, we're going to be asking, how can we drive culture forward? How can we use culture to really nourish and cultivate values of sustainability and inclusivity and justice, whether that's environmental justice or social justice or racial justice? And I'm very pleased to bring you the three guests that we have joining us today. The first joining us from New York is Semaan Vernon, who is the founder of Slow Factory, which is an organization working at the intersection of environmental and social justice. From Berlin, we have Max Gilgenmann, who is the co-founder of MM04, which is a studio developing strategies for sustainable development in the fashion industry. And finally, coming from Zurich, we have Dr. Jeni Fulton, who is the executive editor at Art Basel. And there she's overseeing all of the art fair's digital content. So just to give you guys an idea of how we're going to be heading today, we're going to have a few questions, which these guys are all going to dig into. And then later on, after around 40 minutes or so, we will open things up to a Q&A. So if you guys have any questions that you want to ask any of our guests, just drop it in that question box and we'll get to it at the end. So to kick things off, Céline, both you and your organization have cultivated a really quite a large and really engaged following. And I'm wondering, how have you noticed the conversation on social media developing around these issues in the last year?
Around these issues, you said?
Yeah, so justice, sustainability, inclusivity.
Yes, definitely. So we've been at this in this conversation for the past decade, and we've been working at the intersection of social and environmental justice together as like one intersection and the collision of multiple industries as well. And when we first started, to be honest, it wasn't welcome to discuss it in an anti-siloed kind of way. So meaning not just sticking to your silo, but really inviting the collision of multiple silos and the collision of different industries together, because the thesis that we had was to explore these issues in a global perspective, from a global perspective, from a perspective that's not necessarily Eurocentric and from the global north particularly, and myself coming from the global south. And we decided to design a platform around the voices that are oftentimes left outside of the conversation. And it wasn't an easy journey. It wasn't until the pandemic, let's say, that our platform grew 200% in a way that we couldn't even imagine. I felt like it was because everything that we've been talking about suddenly made sense in a very short amount of time for the general public. And having been some of the first to discuss these topics, especially in the fashion industry, the first to explore these intersections and to really advocate for them in an intellectual kind of way. So it's after several white papers and several articles and several conferences and the support of so many different giants inside the industry, outside the industry, that we felt like, okay, suddenly the movement is going mainstream. What does that mean? What does that mean now that everyone is aware of what's going on? And there are so many articles that are starting to pop here and there about like, okay, now we're all aware of what's going on. What now? What do we do?
Yeah.
Because sharing and clicking on an image does not really change much.
What have the most what sort of topics or themes have been the ones that your audience has engaged with the most, or that has got you the most new followers this year?
Honestly, the work that we've been doing has, I don't know if it's something that we've changed, because I don't think we've changed anything, but it's very much the conversation around racial justice, the conversation around human rights globally, internationally. We don't just talk about U.S. centric issues. We've stood for, Lebanon, my country. We've talked about the explosion that happened in August. We've stood with the our brothers and sisters in Yemen, our brothers and sisters in Palestine, our brothers and sisters in Syria, the refugee crisis being, a byproduct of the climate crisis that we are experiencing globally, the discussion about frontline communities and the Middle East and the global South being hit first with this, not just the pandemic, but also the climate crisis. Um, who are the voices today that are proposing a solution, and centering the voices of our indigenous brothers and sisters in America, in Australia, in New Zealand, talking about in Mexico, talking about the idea that borders are constructs, talking about internationalism with our peers at Progressive International. So it was very much of like, how do we work in a global um, manner, in a global way, without erasing anybody? Because the problem that we've seen in unity, as we understand it, is the erasure of others, the erasure of different voices. And what we didn't want to happen under this, global concept of unity was the erasure. So it was very much about a case by case, you know focus on certain voices and certain issues, and to really bring the attention of everyone around these issues.
Could you give us an example of what you mean when you say erasure?
Yes, of course. So, for instance, under the premise of unity, oftentimes we're looking at a standardization um, of culture. Standardization of how we are looking at things, and that's very much a concept that the global North is comfortable with. And there are so many differences between the cultures of the global North and the cultures of the global South, where in the global South we are looking at some things, and even from a bureaucratic perspective, from a governmental perspective, that is a case by case versus a standardized way. A case by case avoids us from erasing anyone's voice. And that's the process that we're adopting. In terms of erasure, I mean, the US, let's look at the US, for instance, of how indigenous voices have been erased, of how culturally in the mainstream, the idea of indigenous people was believed to be the thing of the past. They don't exist. They were once, but in fact, that's very wrong. And that's the type of erasure we're fighting in my country, in the Middle East. For instance, it's our culture completely that has been erased under the basically how we are being displayed and used in the media as, people who fight each other and who are under bombs and under blood. Like, seriously, if you just Google Beirut, you will never see anyone that looks like me, and you will never see anything that resembles our culture. That's the type of erasure. So it's from an algorithm point of view, it's from a structural point of view, it's from the mainstream, how we are being portrayed. There's several examples. If you want, I can dig deeper, but
No,
this
no,
is
that's
what
great.
comes to.
So Jenny, just to take it over to you, in the art world, how have you noticed the conversation around issues of justice and sustainability and inclusivity? How have they played out in the last year in the art world?
I think so. This year, we obviously saw the Black Lives Matter protests around the middle of the year, and this was an issue that was taken up with a great amount of fervour by artists and curators and critics, where we did see a lot of responses where artists were taking things personally. You know, they were reflecting it in their practices, but they were also going out on the streets. They were participating in activism and protest despite the ongoing limitations owing to the COVID-19 crisis. So I think that because artists tend to reflect the world that's going around them, this was taken up in an almost immediate manner by people talking on Instagram, by people on digital platforms, but by also people on the streets. And so I think actually this year of sitting at home and being at home has allowed us to reflect on practices, also particularly with regards to sustainability, that we might have otherwise not had time to. If you look at how the art world evolved this year, we all had to stay at home. The major events were cancelled. And this allowed, I mean, particularly coming from kind of a world that's very dynamic, that usually involves a lot of travel, that's very event driven. I mean, we always go to the biennales, we go to different art fairs, like the carbon emissions in terms of our flights is quite large. And so this is the year that allowed us to experiment with digital versions of events. So for instance, online art fairs went online, biennales went online, and we got to experiment and see what that was actually like. You know, and I think there was actually some interesting conclusions there where we realized that maybe all the travel wasn't as necessary. Maybe shipping artworks from fair to fair wasn't as necessary as we'd thought it was. We also, in a kind of more positive sense, got to really experiment with augmented reality. There were a number of artworks out there that allowed the audience and visitors to use their smartphones. For instance, there's actually a project in Berlin right now, curated by Annika, taking place at Koenig Gallery, that allows you to use your smartphone to actually place an artwork on Berlin's TV tower. That's actually, you know, something that's super innovative. And I think the fact that we had to engage digitally really pushed that forwards in a way that, and accelerated that in a way that we might not have otherwise seen. So I think rather than us focusing on the pandemic and being sort of stuck at home, really museums, art fairs, institutions and galleries experimented with different methods of collaboration. They experimented with hosting each other in home cities. They experimented with digital exhibitions, and really this idea of engaging an audience digitally. So it's really the year where digital moved from a nice to have to a must have in very, very many different ways, with obvious impacts on sustainability and the discourse around it.
So Max, what Jeni's talking about in the art world, this has also been happening in fashion as well, right? Like our expectations of how we're supposed to engage with new collections and new designers and new trends, this has changed a lot this year. What's your experience of that been?
Oh, very different, I would say. I think the most important part about it really is, as Jeni pointed out already, there was so much possibility to experiment at the end. I mean, there was obviously also the need to. That's always good for humans if there's a need, because then things happen. But at the end of the day, I think also Pardon?
Speak up a bit, you're a bit quiet.
Okay, so I'll try to be more, So, I think the greatest thing about it is really this experimental bit, that we have this kind of play field now. I mean, as many bad things that are coming out of COVID, this definitely is one of the things that I think really is going to help us with the whole sustainable development. In fashion, I mean, we saw everything. We saw a rise on fashion, on virtual fashion shows, and also a rise on creativity, I would say. I mean, one of my favorite kind of pioneers of really innovators of the fashion industry at the moment is the Fabricant, and Amber, one of the founders, or she has put it quite well. I think that in this kind of digital space, there's also a whole new world of creativity that has not been unlocked yet so far. So I think for creative industries, this is gonna be a great kind of consequence at the end. Obviously, first of all, at the moment, I think we have been seeing the pandemic, how it accelerated certain things. But first of all, I think how it amplified good and bad. We have a much clearer image now. I mean, even also the broader public, where things going wrong with the systems that we're running currently and that had been running fairly well for many years. And I think this has got more and more obvious. And so with every week, every month that this pandemic is going on, I think there's more and more opportunities to then really implement change and new kind of systems or new approaches, at least to systems here and there. And that's the very interesting part that we've been looking at and following through. And I mean, for the fashion industry, good and bad sides. We work a lot with trade shows. They don't have a good time at the moment, for sure. And just now came kind of new announcements of everything being further postponed, etc. So that's definitely bad time. And also, if you look at technology, it doesn't provide the things that you need for a trade show yet. You can do certain elements of it online. But I mean, you know, the beauty of really exchanging, talking to each other, being in the same room, you know, the kind of the little magic that goes on between people, you don't get this in this kind of scenarios in purely online worlds, at least not yet.
So when we look at Fashion Week as an institution, how do you think fashion in the future can better represent these sort of more progressive values like sustainability and inclusivity and justice?
Well, I always think like fashion, as many other creative industries, but for me, fashion has always been on the forefront there in terms of adopting new ideas, innovating. This is an amazing open field there now to find new solutions, to be creative, to, on the one hand, accept kind of the limitations that come also from analyzing what is going wrong. I mean, if you look at the sustainability discourse over the last couple of years, I think we know well enough where we got the biggest problems. And if I talk about sustainability, this for me includes the whole discourse about inclusivity, diversity, etc. I don't see any borders there. It's all one big topic. And I think there we could really gain from a new also like lust for innovation, because now you can see there's the space for innovation. In the last couple of years, I think there was many young people or also older people with good ideas that were always running against walls. And now these walls have been turned down quite a bit. So, hey, there's quite something that could help us.
Jeni, when you think about art weeks and art fairs as an institution, how do you think in the future they could better represent these kind of new progressive values? If we talk about sustainability, inclusivity, and social justice and environmental justice.
Well, I think if you look at who is a participant of an art week, for instance, it's always at the galleries. And I think people have become very conscious over the last couple of years about who gets hired. I mean, we had some big moves this year with the Guggenheim, for instance, hiring Naomi Beckwith as a new chief curator, the first Black woman to hold that position. And so we are seeing these shifts happening in the institutional world that bring up other kind of forgotten or overlooked discourses. And that's something I expect to happen more and more, to have just more voices represented, because I think one cannot say in 2021, oh, that's not relevant or that's not something that matters. It clearly matters very much, and so a gallery or anyone saying, oh, we don't believe in this, well, hopefully they will get a very firm rebuttal. And so what we're seeing also in terms of sustainability, so that's kind of one thing. And I do agree with Max that it is part of one large discourse. It's about making things fairer and making things more inclusive. And so we've got a sustainable model. And in terms of sustainability, I think the last year has just given us much ability to just experiment with different formats. I mean, I do foresee galleries during art weeks, for instance, having a digital presence and being able to bring in collectors that might not otherwise be able to travel. So you're going to have your physical presentation of some artworks, and then you'll also have it available digitally, so for people, so it's just more accessible as well. And I always think that it's quite interesting because artworks, or our concept of art, is very object based, right? And it has been for like the last 45,000 years. It's a painting, it's a sculpture. But over the last 50 years, ever since the advent of digital art and video art, we've really seen how that might shift and that might change. And that in itself, if you're no longer shipping around enormous big objects, steel sculptures, that in itself has got an audience question and an accessibility question and also environmental implications.
Are you finding, if you talk about new digital models, are you finding that a lot of these formats and platforms are being used by people who are otherwise normally left out of the conventional art conversation?
I'm not sure because I don't have the data. I think what we do, we obviously, Basel has a big social media audience. And what we're seeing is that we have people, followers on Instagram, for example, that aren't from the typical art world. So I think there we do have a wider platform, and you can see that in the comments, for instance. You can see that in the engagement, that they are people who might be big art lovers, big art fans, but don't necessarily go to the art events or the art weeks. So I think digital can enable you to just reach out to further audiences and to really touch people that you might not otherwise be in touch with.
Great. So quickly, just to remind you guys watching, if anybody has any questions for any of our panelists or any thoughts, please just drop them in the question box, which you can see on the viewer, and we will get to them at the end of the talk. So now that when we're talking about cultural institutions, Céline, I'm interested to hear on what you think about how fashion as an industry could better incorporate more diverse selection of voices. What do you think of that?
That's such a good question. And I think that is, supposing that fashion just needs to be reformed, just let's include some more voices. Let's put some people on, some, Black, brown, indigenous people of color at the realm of certain brands. But that's not looking at how the system of fashion has been designed for hundreds of years, thriving from colonialism and thriving from exploitation. Similarly with the art world, and similarly with most of the industries that are thriving at this time. The fashion world and the art world are very similar, where they survive basically from the exploitation of the global South. One of them is on resources and on manufacturing and labor, and the other is on art and on valuable assets that have been, taken and that have been used as a way to define certain things that are primitive, or certain things that are modern, or certain things that are arbitrarily grouped into these categories. And so same goes for fashion. So fashion and art really go hand in hand in their reckoning of their colonial and racist past, and the way that their systems are designed. So at Slow Factory, we don't just look at what can we do as a quick fix, but we really observe the systems around products, the systems around objects, systems around art, and around what we consider art. What is the system around, even this piece of clothing that I'm wearing? Who made this, and how did we extract that cotton? And how much money were they being paid? All the way to who benefits from it, and so the systems that are designed around these products are oftentimes left outside of the public's perception, and even outside of the CEO's perceptions and the CFO's perception, because at the end of the day, what matters is the bottom line. How much money did you make? And these measures of success are archaic, to say the least. We are still looking at success and defining success based on how much money we're making. But this pandemic has really shifted the perspective of what do we consider successful, because a lot of people were left home without their jobs and without the ability to make money. So that question of success was being reconsidered. What is successful today? What do we consider successful? And what is a new metric of success that we can introduce for the fashion industry in order for it to be able to kind of bridge the gap between their values and their actions? Because yes, they have good intentions, but there aren't any actions that are following these intentions. How do we make that happen? How do we create a model that bridges this gap?
That's a really important point. Max, what do you think about that? About Celine's idea that we need to be introducing new metrics and new ideas of success. How could you see that? What do you feel about that?
I can only fully agree. Actually, I mean, this is exactly also what we are talking about with all the stakeholders. Also at our conference, the summit, the 2020-30 summit that kickstarts on tomorrow. It's exactly these things. Like, how can we introduce, or how can we redesign values that have been around for such a long time? How can we redesign the systems around it? And it's a huge task. I mean, obviously, this is highly complex. I mean, everything is interlinked, and if you change some things on one end of a system, then you have side effects that you might have never wanted. But it's exactly that you have to work on. If we change, like from conventional cotton to organic cotton, or from recycled to recycled polyester, or things like that, it's a starting point, but actually it's only a conversation starter. I think the real change has to go much deeper and needs to touch the systems. And in order to do that, we need to talk about the values and how to define successes. I think one very, very important one. So I guess, first of all, I mean, to kind of bridge to the title of today, I mean, we probably first of all need a very successful rebellion.
How could that look?
Definitely needs to be stylish. I mean, that's being here today with Fashion Open Studio and Fashion Revolution as the organizers. And I mean, we've also been very active with Fashion Revolution in Germany over the last years. That's always been one of the premises there. To offer all the ideas and present all the problems that we have, but not to scare people away by just kind of throwing things at them where they feel, okay, this I can't even deal with all of this really negative information, and we need to find a way that we can run these discourses on all levels, and that we get into a societal change, which includes the so-called consumer, which always annoys me, because first of all it's citizens, and they have a couple of roles, not just the role of buying, and then we need them to influence also the politics need to influence more the industry, etc. But it also doesn't even make sense to just talk about these kind of areas in the society, because all of them are interconnected. All politicians are citizens, all people working in the industry are citizens, and so on. So like we definitely have to start first of all with our own consciousness and our own ideas of success. And maybe there's a chance. I mean, awareness, mindfulness, and all these kind of things, for me personally, sometimes to an annoying amount of kind of marketing, have been very famous in societies, and at least in the probably more Eurocentric societies, I'm not sure. And maybe it's now, after 10 years of ego, self-consciousness, maybe we can go to the next level and be more kind of overall conscious also about the other people around us, not just about ourselves.
That's a great point. Céline, I can just see that you've got something to contribute here. Tell us what's on your mind.
Definitely. What we want to say basically here is that we have to be careful not to spiritually bypass this movement, by saying, it starts from within. It does start from within to a certain degree, but this exploration of translating the complex into clear actions are in the works by multiple organizations, and Slow Factory is one of them, working hand in hand with others. I really encourage everyone to look into Progressive International, which is a progressive common front that I am a part of as a council member, and look into how you could accelerate these types of research groups, okay? Because the research has already been happening for, let's say, some decades. For us, it has been 1 decade. For other groups, it has been way more than that. And for certain independent groups, it has been ongoing since the beginning of colonizing the Americas. So at the end of the day, yes, it's complex, but complexity cannot stop us. And another thing I would like to say is that perfection is the enemy of progress. At the same time that we want something to be completely perfect and done, we're not going to get to that level of perfection, because that's just not possible at this time. So any type of action is needed, and the awareness of our position and our place of power and our responsibility in the places of power that we happen to fall into are key into how do we move the needle together. And so I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
We've actually had a question come in, Céline, that I think would be really interesting for you. The people at Fashion Africa Now want to ask, what's your opinion on European companies, agencies, NGOs, and organizations? What's your opinion when these organizations receive funding allocated for projects that are actually in the Black creative sector?
Oh yeah, I have so much to say. So similarly to Lebanon, European agencies are capitalizing on what's going on in this country, in our country, and for sure, a lot of organizations, European and American organizations, are capitalizing on the issues that are happening in Africa. And the problem is that the general public funds these organizations because they trust them, because they feel legit, and the money gets stuck into these organizations. They don't trickle down to the people in need, or they don't trickle down to organization or local organizations, grassroots movements, because it's not true that a foreign non-for-profit is going to solve the issue locally into a country that they have no connections to, whether it's roots or connections to grassroots organizers, grassroots, or even just simply people. And we've seen that these issues, happen during the explosion in Beirut. And I'm just going to speak from that perspective. But that is definitely what's happening with foreign agencies having a pied-à-terre in the global south, what they call the third world countries. And that's very, very problematic, the way that they are being mandated to solve these issues, applying, principles that just don't work in the country that they're in. For instance, we looked at standardization, we looked at the case-by-case model, we looked at a cultural erasure, where they arrive and they have a model and they expect that this model is to happen, is to work, while employing majority European or American task forces. That is one of the biggest issues we're seeing now. Every time there's an issue anywhere in the world, the first people to capitalize on it and to buy ads on social media to capture these donations are foreign entities, European or American entities, whether they're the UN or UN something, or the any other organization that is capitalizing on these issues, end up galvanizing the donations because the general public trusts them. And then the money gets stuck into these organizations. It doesn't trickle down to grassroots, and it doesn't even get accounted for. There's no accountability model into figuring out how this money how did we get allocated this much? Why did we get allocated this much? And not more, where is the progress here? And so that's definitely for Africa Now, Fashion Africa Now. Sorry, what is the name of the organization?
Fashion Africa Now.
Fashion Africa Now. Yes, I see you. That's true. There's so many foreign organizations capitalizing on these issues.
Great, thank you for that answer. Max, I see that you've got your hand raised here. What would you like to contribute?
I think it does visualize, or it does showcase quite well one of these very general problems. Like we have been living the life of globalization for like many decades now, and now we need to switch really into glocalization. In that, this kind of famous buzzwords is. Well, you have to think global and act local, but there's so much truth in that. And I mean, here I think you can see, I mean, I'm not sure if there's much better ways to kind of raise money for such kind of catastrophe scenarios where you quickly need money. I think, I'm generally quite critical about charities, but in this case of catastrophic charity raising, I think it makes sense. And it makes sense that this is done by organizations that have the trust of where the money should be raised. So that all makes sense. But then, I mean, if you go into action, yeah, you have to work with other people. You have to work with the networks that are there, that know what to do. And this is still seems to be very difficult, this kind of translation between these different groups, you know. There's different work cultures, obviously, that clash together. Then you have like a German, I don't know, huge NGO that has been very bureaucratic already, and they get the money. And then they have to work with like a local grassroots organization that has no bureaucracy, no structure. And they can't fill in the forms that are needed for German money transfer. I don't know, these kind of problems, we really need to get there and need to find much easier solutions and not get stuck in like these sometimes way too complicated systematic approaches.
That's a great point. So the last question I wanted to ask you guys is that after a year of essentially being confined to our homes, which has meant that the majority of activism and the majority of conversations have had to take place digitally, the big question now, and that's something Céline touched on earlier, is how do we then move on into the real world? You know, how does this then translate into meaningful action? So, Jeni, if you take a look at the art world, how do you imagine things playing out once lockdown is lifted and once people are able to gather again? How do you see things developing in the art sphere then?
I think that's a really good question, because I don't think it's going to be a case of lockdown will be lifted and we'll all be able to return to our previous lives immediately, just because we're going to see different vaccination rates. We're going to see travel restrictions, I think, ongoing until next year, potentially even. We don't know. I mean, it's a very dynamic environment. And what we've seen so far this year is that there's going to be a first IRL art fair, SEA Focus Singapore, that's going to be launching in 2 days' time, actually. And I'm personally really excited about that. It's going to have a very local audience, and it's going to have a big talks program, a big digital component. There's going to be, and I think it's just, we're just going to have to see how the dynamics work out there. And I don't think anyone really wants to return to the status quo of traveling 200 days a year. I think that is something that we've internalized. And also, I think there's an ongoing discussion, you know, about, for instance, things like transporting artworks. Do they really need to go in an aeroplane every single time? Can you put them on a boat? There's organizations like Julie's Bicycle, who, for instance, are working together with the Royal Academy, looking at things like carbon footprints. So I think there's going to be an increased kind of wanting just to stop talking about it and actually implementing these more sustainable approaches to an industry, to our industry.
And Max, when you think about the same situation in fashion, how do you see things developing?
Well, I think the time fashion industry now had to go deeper into digitization and also at the same time reflect more and so think more even about sustainability. That has a positive impact. I'm sure we see like also downsides, because obviously there's huge amounts of clothes piled up that still want to be sold to somebody at some point. But also I think we have a lot of players that realize, okay, now is the time for change, and we're going to use this historic chance that we have here, really. I think obviously the changes that involve financial benefits will still be the ones that are most favored. So I expect much less traveling, definitely even way more 3D prototyping, these kind of things, kind of efficiency. I mean, the fashion industry was really, really inefficient over the last couple of decades. Basically, it hasn't changed in 80 years or something. I mean, technology-wise, in a lot of parts, big parts of the supply chains. So there, I'm sure a lot of changes are happening. Retail, going way more online, even more online, for sure. And I think, I mean, for us, the most exciting question is, okay, when can we meet people again? When can trade shows, fashion shows, etc. happen again? And I think the biggest question there is going to be who can come. Yeah, how will international travel continue? I mean, I always enjoyed traveling because it's also a source of inspiration for me to meet people from very different kind of backgrounds. But at the same time, yeah, we don't need the amounts of travel that we had. And we need to be way more picky and way more exclusive about when does it make sense, and then also enjoy those moments more. But yeah, I don't see any kind of big international shows in the next 1 year probably still. I mean, maybe that's also a good thing and a chance. We will have more local events that through hybrid formats like this, we can also international, obviously, with speakers and exchange through all kind of technology. But first of all, if we talk about meetups, I guess we're going to see a few more local events first, and maybe that's good for also the fashion circles.
Céline, we have another question coming in for you, this time from Elise. Elise wants to know, Céline, what is your opinion of platforms like Diet Prada? They've built themselves on holding big corporations accountable. However, they also use the power of social media followings to try to cancel these corporations. Do you think cancel culture is necessary, or do you see a more inclusive approach?
What a good question. Yes, I mean, what can I say? Cancel culture, it's problematic because it's necessary, but it's oftentimes used to cancel just individuals. And I think we have to look at cancel culture again, but case by case. In the case of canceling an organization, or at least raising awareness about the fact that this organization is continuing to ignore the public's demand for progress, then I think we need to rally and demand that this organization does better. So when cancel culture is organized in such a way to use the power of the people to address, basically the David and Goliath fight that we're facing here, then we need to have this cancel culture that we're talking about to really address the systemic changes that we're looking to address. When cancel culture is used against the system, that's legitimized. When the cancel culture is used against an individual, that's bullying, and that's not okay. And we've seen that happen in various places where cancel culture was used against an individual. Now, if this individual is being has a very strong power within the system, then that's not bullying, that's still using it against the system. So it's very much a case by case, and we can't just say, oh, well, you're for cancel culture, you're saying that's okay. No, that's not okay if it's used against an individual that has no power. When it's within that large system, that person cannot make that big change that you're asking them, then you're bullying them by asking them to hold the pressure of that system on their shoulders, which is what's happening in social media right now. If we are addressing cancel culture, or leveraging the power of the public to address systemic changes, then yes, this is legitimized.
Max, what do you think of that? I can see you've got your hand up there. Give us your thoughts there.
Yeah, very well said. I think it's such an important point, because I am afraid that kind of greenwashing and whatever washings, they come in all colors, obviously, is on the rise for the next couple of years. And I think kind of watchdogs in whatever shape or form are a good tool against that. But yeah, case by case, that's always going to be needed. I mean, we should be capable, by using also our digital tools, to be more specific, more individual, and not be so superficial to put everything always in one box. I mean, that's not going to bring us any solution. I think that's we need to address the complexity, and we need to find solutions that really are capable to cater to this complexity. And for that, I think it's very important to do this individual analyzations of what is right in this situation. So yeah, and I think social media, it does have a problem there sometimes with the speed it kind of generates, and also with the human hunger for like negative news, like how they spread quicker. There's a certain problem with that, and a certain self dynamic that we need to be careful with. But also on the other side, I mean, I think also activism has become so en vogue in many ways. We also need to see like where's the limits there. I mean, we have like activism tourists that go for 1 week to Africa to kind of help out in, I don't know, a remote little village, and then they're gone again after a week, stuff like that. I mean, that's not, it's so funny where humanity always goes with like turning, I don't know, like going too far with whatever good idea once was there. There's always somebody who takes it too far and brings it to an absurd level. And these kind of things would be great if we watch them and find appropriate answers and put things a bit more on the right track.
Right, so just to bring things... Oh, Céline, please do let us know what's on your mind.
I wanted to say one more thing about that is that, we have to not put a blanket of humanity on certain actions that are clearly, coming from a specific culture. When we're looking at what's going on right now with... whitewashing or greenwashing or, woke washing. There's, again, a lot of washing. It's not humanity, and it's not all of us that now suddenly are being having to explore this. It's a certain part of people and a certain part of privileged folks that are taking way too much space in doing X, Y, and Z. So I just wanted to make sure that we are not going to throw a blanket of humanity on the actions of certain folks that aren't representative of humanity. And that's one. Two, just going back to a platform like Diet Prada, it exists because the fashion industry consistently ignored years of asks that were done in so many different ways that were not necessarily cancel culture. They were done in a diplomatic way, they were made in an artistic way, they were made in a humoristic way, they were made in a elegant way, in a graceful way, all the way till that reached the point of a necessity to have a platform like Diet Prada, sadly, where we have to humiliate them at this point, and we don't have any other choice because of the fashion industry constantly brushing under the rug. And that's a very colonial attitude of brushing under the rug and pretending nothing ever happened, or pretending it's all good, it's great, we're all fine, we're going to just go back with New York Fashion Week as planned, and or Chanel is going to create a rocket inside of a stadium and pretend nothing ever happened. Look at this beauty. And then the art world also continues to stuff under the rug and stuff, like, kind of silence the movement in any which way that they can, all the way till it reaches a point of anger. And again, just like this week, we've commemorated the birthday of Martin Luther King, and again, the level of whitewashing that we've seen in that day was hideous, to say the least. And to undermined what Dr. King was saying, that riots are the language of the unheard, and that's just to go back to Diet Prada's. That's what we're seeing here. This is the language of the unheard, and the protests and us going into anger. Anger is also the other facet of love, like when we reach that point of anger is because there's sometimes this idea that we deserve more, we deserve better, and so this goes into the climate conversation, this goes into social change conversations. And I just want to say that cancel culture, it's not just a blanket statement for everything. It has to be looked at case by case.
That's a great point. Thank you for making it. So just before we wrap up, guys, I think let's just go around and, in a sentence or two, try and sum up like where you hope culture is headed in the coming year. Jeni, what direction do you hope that culture is going to be headed in 2021?
I really hope that we see a continuation of the movements over the past couple of years, where we've seen Indigenous voices being uplifted, where we're seeing different art forms being uplifted, where it's not just a unidirectional sense of these are the important artists, So we really understand what a multilateral art world might be and what these artworks that are then made by these people might look like. And that's what I really hope, just to see more diversity.
Max, how about you? Give us your hopes.
give you all my hopes. You can have them. I think, I mean, it's also a bit of a question, how do you understand culture? For me, I mean, culture is what lives in our societies, in between all these relationships that are there. And I think in that sense, my biggest hope is, first of all, that if we talk about sustainability and the future of fashion, that it includes more culture. First of all, it includes like all the diversity of cultures that we as humans have created. Because so far, I think, I mean, it's kind of maybe the fourth pillar of sustainability, which was missing so far. We've always been talking about like, okay, what goes bad? How can we change it? What is the action? We have analyzed it. We've found all kind of things. We're okay now, I think, in terms of transparency. We've learned so much, but we have not learned how to really bring these things into implementation. And that's because sustainability has never been really in touch with the current culture around us. And that's what needs to happen. It needs to be in there. It needs to be woven into the society. And that, for me, is a job for culture.
Céline, how about you? What do you hope for in culture in 2021?
Definitely. One thing is decentralization. So decentralizing what culture is, what culture means, who gets to be called a cultured civilization, who has culture, who owns culture. So decentralization of culture, that does not mean inclusion and diversity. That definitely means, a decentralization of power, a defunding also of the big entities, a redistribution of funds is necessary when we're discussing about culture, because otherwise we're still going to be stuck in our systems where there are. It's designed, but it's by design that poverty exists. It's by design that certain entities have access to wealth, while others don't. And whoever has access to wealth has access to culture, has access to creating culture. And decentralization of culture also means a redistribution of funds so that we can see culture happening everywhere in the world, and a way for us to actively be part of this culture of sustainability. Sustainability is itself a culture. So who gets access to sustainability is also problematic, because right now, whoever gets access to sustainability in the mainstream media is upper middle class folks, whereas sustainability is a culture that already has been implemented in indigenous cultures in the global south. Sustainability by necessity has been what we've seen, and I've written at length about this. It's not so what we would like to see, what we hope to see, is a decentralization, a redistribution of funds, and a decentralization of power.
Amazing. Thank you. So thank you guys for taking part today. It's been such a pleasure hearing your thoughts and opinions on these issues. And to anybody in the comments who we weren't able to answer your questions, I'm very sorry, but we've actually run out of time, so we weren't able to get there. But thank you guys so much for taking part today. And please don't forget to check out the rest of the Fashion Open Studio talks. They've got loads and loads of great stuff coming up. Thank you all for taking part, and take care. Stay healthy. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
And check out 2020-30 Summit.